So let me start by asking Pranjal about what do you think Finance Minister Sitharaman can do at this moment to try and make most of the global tailwinds that seem to be blowing in India's favor?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the best thing that can be done now is to keep the budget boring. And by boring, I mean keep it predictable, keep it credible, and just go on the path which you've promised. Now, we talk a lot about growth, but in a year like 2023, when there's a lot of uncertainty globally, I think the best thing that we can do in India is maintain macro stability. And macro stability means low inflation, fiscal consolidation, lower trade deficit than what we had last year. Because if the stage is set with macro stability, when the global economy turns and rises again in the next couple of quarters, hopefully, India will be ready for a takeoff. So I think the budget should be boring. It should basically focus more on macro stability rather than high growth. And from that perspective, I think the path is very clear. The finance minister has already spoken about a fiscal consolidation path, bringing down the fiscal deficit from 6.5% to 4.5% over the next 3 years. It should really, focus on that path. Of course, on the background, some changes can happen. For instance, improving the tax regime, and we can come back to that later, and also focusing on capex, which has been a thrust of the government, but mostly focusing on continuity rather than doing something dramatic and big bang.
Given the emphasis that we've seen on public spending and capital expenditure, do you see that continuing, or do you think it's reached a level where the government will need to start cutting back, Samiran, to some extent? What do you think can be done in this unique moment for India to try and step on the accelerator on economic growth?
Clearly, Rahul, I would say that investment, investment and investment. I think in the last year's budget, if you look at, this was the theme of the budget. We don't change themes every year. So there is a need to continue with that theme. And our sense is that not only in rupees trillion terms, but also as a percentage of GDP, there's a need to increase the public capex part. And increasingly what the central government is realizing is that it's only a limited areas where the central government can make a lot of capex. The power lies often with the state governments. So it's quite keen to deliver a larger amount of resources to the state governments to spend as well.
But when I speak to bureaucrats and ministers in the government, what I find is a growing sense of unstated frustration with the fact that when it comes to spending, the government is having to do the heavy lifting, and despite the deep and sharp reduction in corporate taxes, private investment isn't stepping up to the plate. And I think Nirmala Sitharaman has publicly spoken up about this a couple of times, nudging India in to do more when it comes to investment. But that, for some reason, doesn't seem to be happening.
So I don't think there is any other option but to be patient. We have to understand that even pre-pandemic, India was going through pretty slow growth compared to what India's history has been. And the pandemic has obviously had almost 2 years of low growth. And now with this whole geopolitical uncertainties, it's difficult for private capex to immediately pick up, given the background that we have seen of last 5-6 years. But what we have to also keep in mind is that we are now reaching almost all the preconditions that are required for a private capex recovery. Look at corporate balance sheets. If you look at the financial system balance sheets, we haven't seen this kind of a balance sheet in almost a decade. So with the right kind of public capex and the policy thrust that is there towards manufacturing that this government has put forward, I think it's just a matter of time we will see a private capex recovery.
But Soumya Kanti Ghosh, this is something that the pundits have been saying for a long time, that capacity utilization is in the mid-70s. India is poised for a multi-year investment cycle, an investment cycle which so far hasn't kicked off in right earnest. Why? And do you think, like Samiran, that that's now finally about to change?
Yeah, thank you, Rahul. No, I think that last 2 years during the pandemic, if you look into the corporate balance sheet, they have significantly deleveraged. And so that's the first thing. So that's one of the preconditions for investment taking off. The second point to note is that if you actually look into the bank credit today, credit growth actually has continued to expand even though there has been some moderation in the recent week. And a large part of this credit growth is not only the working capital requirement, which typically comes when the inflation is on the higher side, but also term loans and also some project announcements, as we are seeing in our books. So in my sense, I think there is evidence of an pickup in private investment activity. May not be that encompassing which all of us want it to happen, but at this point of time, if I look into the sectors which is deleveraged, like steel, like the metal sector, there is evidence of some amount of private investment picking up. But as we progress, and as basically as all of you also, as also there has been a lot of geopolitical conflict and uncertainty. So I think as the fog clears on the global economy also, I am sure that the investment is going to take off in a meaningful manner.